Tobias Elder was a man that spent a great deal of time in Parliament. He's not there anymore. Tobias, very good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
So, I mean, I know this is off to the side. We'll get on to Ukraine in a minute. But, I mean, a lot of people questioning this morning, story in the Mail, in which it's revealed that an awful lot of government ministers have been claiming for their heating allowance, which is seemingly rather ironic given that they've taken pensioners' heating allowance away from them.
Yes, I think you have to be careful as a minister. Indeed, as a parliamentarian, you are scrutinised quite rightly by the public, even by shows like yourselves, because this is taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
But I would also say, in defence of all parliamentarians, it's not an easy job. And whilst you do need to be careful with taxpayers' money, we do actually want good people to step up. So when people do perhaps abuse the system, they've got to remember that all MPs end up being criticised for this. And we actually want good people to step forward into this job. We want our country to be run by the brightest and the best in Britain. And I have a wider concern that we're not able to attract the best from the general public, because it is from that gene pool that, of course, Parliament is made up. And then from there that we then get government. So there is a bigger picture here of making sure that individuals are responsible, but we then don't somehow distance the interest that people may have in ever thinking about stepping into public life. I
wonder if it's time again to have another look at the Ipsos system, that the parliamentary sort of expenses system, which none of them have breached, by the way. They're claiming whatever they're allowed to claim. I just wonder whether, given the current climate, people might like to see them claiming a little bit less and maybe being allowed to claim a little bit less in terms of second homes.
Yeah, there is now an independent body that looks at this, deliberately so, because of that big expenses scandal, a number of years ago. It's for them now, I think, to listen to what you're saying, what the public is saying, and then make sure that those rules are there, very transparent, and indeed enforced.
Yeah, absolutely right. Now, this morning we're led to believe by a poll that's just come out that more than half of Britain now thinks that Keir Starmer is leading this country in the wrong direction. His approval rating has plummeted from just 6 or 7 weeks ago of a +16 down to a sort of a 0 and into minus territory. And he's also now being accused this morning on the front page of the Daily Telegraph by Vladimir Zelensky of slowing down aid and help and support for Ukraine. What do you make of that?
Well, let's deal with the first ones first. It's very easy to criticise when you're in opposition. It's another matter to govern wisely. And we've seen this over the last number of years, where there's been huge criticism directed at the Conservatives whilst in government. But where are the solutions? And when you then get into government, it becomes your responsibility. Boy, do things change. You realise, actually, you've got to make tough decisions. But let's not take away from the fact that I'm afraid we did look pretty incompetent towards the end, despite Rishi Sunak taking us into calmer fiscal waters. I'm afraid the British nation had had enough. It's now time to regroup. We now need to see this and say, my goodness, if they are going down in the polls, the Labour Party, what can we do to then shore ourselves up and present ourselves as a viable opposition that is wanting to get back into government? That is now the challenge for the Conservative Party as we go through our leadership contest.
But of course, as the Labour Party tries to do things, it seems the more things that they do, the more unpopular they become. We've got the papers this morning full of their plans to rework the workplace so that people can claim all sorts of compensation, more workers' rights, more money given to the unions, more pay rises given to the public sector. All of the things that they're doing, while they might think they're proving themselves to their base and proving themselves to the people who voted for them. An awful lot of people didn't vote for them. An awful lot of people are starting to get a bit cheesed off about the fact that unions are doing particularly well, but an awful lot of Labour Party members and an awful lot of Labour Party politicians are in the pay of those unions.
Yeah, I mean, you make some very important points which the nation is going to recognise and say, well, actually, did I vote for any of this? But I go back to the point that it's actually governments that lose elections, it's not oppositions that win them. But if governments are unpopular, then people will then turn to the alternative and say, am I ready to actually vote for the Conservative Party again? And that then shines the light on us as Conservatives to say, let's get our act in order. Let's present ourselves as that viable opposition. Let's show the unity and sense of purpose and have policies that actually resonate with the British people.
And at the moment, though, there's a sort of mixed message coming from the Tories, isn't there? Because you've got all these leadership candidates, of which we're told James Cleverly is in the lead at the moment in terms of the membership. But they're all saying different things. They're all taking different views about various issues in the public eye. And Rishi Sunak hasn't been seen or heard from, I don't think, since about July the 5th. And he hasn't really said anything at all publicly in any public forum that I can find.
Well, if we're going to be frank, nobody's listening to the Conservative Party. We were well and truly beaten, and we need to put our hands up and say that. But we need to show now the humility, the professionalism, and the resolve to then regroup. That includes learning the lessons as to why we did so badly. We've not really had that review to any degree. We've gone straight into this leadership election. I hope it remains dignified, and I hope that there's a recognition of what I think all 5 candidates actually believe in. And it's important that we do that, because if there isn't a sense of purpose of what we agree, what the party is about, it could be taken in different directions.
Yeah.
So let's utilize this time wisely to confirm where in the political spectrum, for example, we're actually trying to position ourselves. You know, some are calling, let's say, move with the right, add ourselves to reform, that'll take us in one direction. Others are saying, like myself, let's remain that broad church, because historically, that's actually what's won us elections. It's that middle ground in British politics. Grab that and you get across the line, as Tony Blair, indeed Keir Starmer did. If you go to your extremes, you don't get re-elected. So there's some almost philosophical questions that I think need to still be answered by my party as we advance forward.
And what do you make of what Vladimir Zelensky's saying about Keir Starmer today in the Telegraph, basically that he feels that Britain's kind of easing up on the aid, and Boris Johnson was obviously seen as a great supporter, and so was Rishi Sunak, I suppose. But is Keir Starmer's heart in that?
Well, let's place what's happened in the last week into context. This audacious attack into the Kursk region, into Russia, is a potential game changer in this conflict, scupping any ideas of having peace talks anytime soon. It's raised the spirits of the Ukrainians, no doubt about it. And it's proving that with well-trained, well-equipped, well-motivated troops, Russia can be beaten.
And that's quite surprising, really, isn't it?
It is for many, because they think, my goodness, look at the size of Russia. They can't be defeated. But let's be really clear. This is a huge embarrassment for Putin. This is his war, his personal choice to invade, and he now becomes the first Russian leader to cede terrain to a foreign state since World War II. And he's now obliged to redirect forces from Donbass. But the enormity of this opportunity to turn the Ukrainian tide and prevent the outbreak of wider war in Europe, given Putin's clear long-term intentions, must not be missed. And that goes back to Keir Starmer approving the use of Storm Shadow in Ukraine.
And let's talk about Gaza briefly. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, was out there in Israel over the course of the last few days. Benjamin Netanyahu refused to see him, some would say because of perhaps things that he said in the past about Israel. He also did something which he's been criticised for, which was that when he met the Israeli representatives, he was wearing a badge that was significant about Israeli hostages being held in Gaza. When he went to meet the Palestinians, he took it off. We shouldn't be playing politics like that, should we?
No, I absolutely agree with that. You need to be very clear of where you stand and what you stand for. And you can't be giving mixed messages depending on who your audience is. I mean, just to lift it to the bigger picture, the arrival of Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State in the region, shows that this effort to secure a ceasefire and hostage release is serious. Having said that, you know, we've been here before, so close to agreement, but then talks fall apart, given the long-standing gaps between the two sides. Securing a 6-week ceasefire is actually the simple part. Downing weapons, stopping the airstrikes, allowing aid agencies in. The more complex challenges are who runs Gaza in the longer term. Many believe that Hamas is a terrorist organization and should never be running
Well, they are a terrorist organisation, aren't they? I mean, it's not whether people believe that they are. I mean, they are. They are a prescribed terrorist organisation.
Yeah, they're listed as a terrorist organisation. Yeah. But then that presents the problem. Do they then have control of governance and indeed security in the Gaza Strip? And for many, that's a red line, including the Israelis and indeed for myself. The second question is to do with security arrangements. Israel wants to keep a military presence in the Gaza Strip. And to many Arab countries, and indeed to Hamas, that's a red line as well. And longer term, something we don't spend enough time talking about, what do we do about Iran's proxy influence that sits behind much of the instability across the Middle East? So these are the bigger issues. And worryingly, though, Blinken called this the best, but probably the last opportunity for peace. And it begs the question as to whether actually both sides want an agreement at all. But with Iran still poised to launch a retaliatory attack against Israel after killing Hamas and Hezbollah leaders, the Middle East, I'm afraid, has never looked so dangerous for a generation.
Yeah, I think so. Tobias, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Tobias Ellwood there, former Conservative MP